Hi, welcome to the Transformative Media Organizing Skillshare. Today, Anthony Johnson with the NOLA GSA network will be facilitating a Skillshare on cultural events and a guide to appreciation instead of appropriation. Um, let's see, we're going to go around and do quick introductions just so you all know who's here on this hangout with us today. My name is Bex Hurwitz with Research Action Design. My pronouns are they and she, and I'm calling in from Brooklyn.
Hey y'all, my name is Angel. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm from the Knowledge Jenkins Family Center in Durant, Mississippi.
Hey folks, it's Anna Davis here. I work for GSA Network Southeast. I go by she, her, and hers, and I'm calling in from Gulfport, Mississippi.
Hello, everyone. This is Kamisha Smith. I'm calling in from Lexington, Mississippi with Knowledge Jenkins Family Center.
What's up, everybody? This is Julia Shavers. I'm calling in from New Orleans at Breakout.
Hi, all. I'm Jess, and I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia, with Solutions Not Punishment Coalition, and my pronouns are she and her.
This is
Hey everybody.
All right, did everyone get a chance to introduce themselves?
No, I was gonna go. I'm Shayna. In New Orleans. I go by she, her, hers.
Great. Thanks, Shana. Thanks, everyone. Can everyone remember to mute if you're not speaking? And Anthony, please take it away.
Hey, my name is Anthony Johnson, aka Kim, but with a I, but with a Y instead of I. I work for the New Orleans GSA network as the New Orleans GSA organizer. Our mission statement is to provide safe, accountable space for queer and trans youth of color in Greater New Orleans area to learn and grow from through community engagement, leadership development, and mobilization. And I want to kind of talk about a little bit like some things that we do before I jump into like the Skillshare itself. And so we maintain weekly programs that's just like our community GSA space. Um, our community GSA space is a space in which where queer and trans youth can kind of access and kind of come and let that be their space in order like to learn to gauge issues within like their schools or out in their community. But it's like a leadership development space, also like a chill spot for youth in general. And also talk about like technical support within schools within New Orleans too, in terms of helping youth in the school or school administrators with GSA development or kind of like laying down the framework or helping the youth in general like with the framework of GSAs within their schools. Um, and last year was our this is a little bit context what we've been doing so far this year and last year was our first GSA summit, excuse me, was our first GSA summit, and we had about 30 people, 30 youth come out, and it was a beautiful event, which we kind of like had some partnership with other organizations in New Orleans, such as Breakout, the Movement, and some of our rest of like some of our members from our youth council then who came through and like did like presentations on sexual health or know your rights or and how to have a GSA. So that was last year. And so this year, we've been kind of like prepping for our summit again, which is happening next month or within the next 2 months. So, without further ado, I kind of like want to lead us into our Skillshare presentation. So, also throughout this, we're going to have our hashtags, which is hashtag Timor Skillshare and hashtag Career South. So, if you have any questions or whatnot, or have any response, then you can just hashtag your response. So without further ado, can I get the next slide? All right, so I want to first kind of like they have the framework or context of like excuse me, framework and context of like some definitions. So basically, all the definitions I have gotten from Webster. So it's like pretty much very broad and like plain definitions, and also open the space for anyone to kind of have their own definitions, kind of incorporate and add the definitions too. So the definition I have for culture is the beliefs, the customs, the art, etc. of a particular society, group, place, or time. So when I think about culture, I think about culture being particularly belonging to a set group of people and that value and that traditions that they hold and uphold within that. So that's how I look at culture. I want to offer the space if any of my cohort have any other definitions of culture that they want to kind of like share with us today. Alrighty, I guess I'll move on. Can I get the next slide then? So traditions. So traditions are an inherent, established, or customary pattern of thoughts, actions, or behaviors as a religious practice or a social norm. So when I think about tradition, I think about something that's happening continuously, something that's consecutive, whether it's annually or every other year or every other week, something like that, something that as a group of people have decided they were going to do and uphold and continue to do it. And so it often are like associated become the social norm or a custom or just something that people just kind of like do all the time that often turn into a tradition. And just like the first question, I will kind of open up the space for some of my cohort members to kind of give up their definition of what a tradition is for them. So anybody want to talk about like how would you define tradition? If I did a good job, send me a thumbs up. And I can move on. All right, thank you. So next slide. So this is so for this slide I am insisting that some of my cohort members answer this question. And also there's a dial-in number two. So if you're at home and want to kind of like hear that side or want to kind of have your voice being heard, you can call in the dial number at the bottom, or you can hashtag Team or Skillshare with your response, or hashtag Careersoft with your response. So the question I want to pose for my cohort is, what is a cultural tradition you practice? I'm gonna offer some space for some beautiful people.
Hey, this is Shayna. So example of a cultural tradition could be like a family reunion or a wedding reception done in, a certain way, a repast, things like that.
Right, thank you. Is there anyone else who want to share? If you're good, thumbs up, thumbs down. If I can move on. Can I have the next slide, please? So, appreciation. So, when we talk about appreciation, we're talking about the ability to understand the worth or the quality of an importance of something. So, basically, I look at appreciation is like valuing something without necessarily being there. So I value the fact that there are a lot of yeah. So just in general, it's like just for my definition, just valuing the fact that there are just appreciating that culture or valuing the fact that it's there. It might not be something that I can personally relate to, but the fact that I can value it as if it was just like something that like my people, but not something that my people did, but just in terms of just like me valuing that culture, and that's how I look at of appreciation, just valuing things, what for what they're worth and the quality and the meaningfulness that they have on people um who that tradition or that culture belongs to. So I would want to move on to the next slide. So we have appropriation, and so anyone would mind one reading appropriation for me?
It reads appropriation, to take or make use of without authority or right.
So pretty much when I think about appropriation, I think about when I think about someone stealing from me basically. So it's like to steal from another culture, to take something away from another culture that isn't yours is like appropriation. And for this I want to necessarily make a clear distinguish between cultural appropriation, cultural assimilation, and cultural exchange. And so I feel like sometimes people can confuse those two. Confuse those three. So when we talk about cultural exchange, we talk about us coming to a neutral space together and upholding that together, where it's like I come into the space as my full self, you enter the space as your full self, and we exchange that culture. And it's a mutually beneficial thing. When we talk about cultural assimilation, we talk about a small group of people who have to conform to a large group or a large society or a dominant culture in order to survive. And so I want to kind of make that clear distinguish that appropriation is when something that's not your culture, that you are taking it and not to consideration of the people who originally came up with it, but just taking because you feel like it's the new trend or because you feel like it's something that you can look cute in or whatnot. And assimilation is like when people are forced to take on that persona, people are forced to take on the culture of dominant society in order to survive. And then that exchange is when we all come into one space, and it's this neutral flow of culture in which we hold each other accountable to what we're putting out there and how we interpret that. So I just want to kind of make that clear distinguish. If anyone else kind of like wanna, cause yeah, I want to pose it to y'all. Like, how do y'all look at appropriation and the difference between assimilation and cultural exchange? So I want to pose that question to y'all.
Hey, what's up? It's Angel from Nolly's. So I think appropriation is what it is like what Anthony was saying about the whole aspect of stealing, taking something that is not yours, but also not going the proper way about taking that cultural exchange, and like acknowledging who it came from, why it was used in that way, when trying to really appreciate that culture, but instead it comes off as like you're taking it because you don't recognize what the people have gone through to be able to do that, and how that comes from their people and who started it and who originated it, which is something that we see all the time, especially like with Black culture. We see often a lot of our things get appropriated and then get called new. Things that we've been doing for years, how we dance, how we move, how we talk, everything, even our vernacular is something that is taken from us and seen as urban or exotic or something new, that white folks came up with. So that's how I think about cultural appropriation.
Thank you. Anyone else kind of like have something they want to share?
Yeah, I think the other thing when I think about appropriation, I think is not respecting like an individual or community self-determination to who gets to participate and respect the culture and kind of respect the boundaries. So I think it's all like when I think about appropriation, I think about dominant cultures and dominant people in kind of dominant positions of power, not respecting self-determination of different communities.
Thank you. But there's anyone else who kind of want to share if I move on to the next slide?
This is Ellen. So is this similar also to, I think it was the movie 10 when, I forget her name, but she wore braids and all of a sudden there was this hoopla around braids were more fashionable when women of color and women from, and particularly from Africa were wearing braids for a very long time. So I think about wearing braids and locks in your hair, how that may be appropriated from the diaspora culture.
Right, and that in itself is a really, really great example of like appropriation and how we see it kind of playing out. Like even like this whole trend of we see white men with a little one little braid right there, and they like all of a sudden supermodels now, and it's like no, we've been doing that for the longest now. Just sit down somewhere. But yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, thank you for. I'm sorry, I had it on mute. Thank you for sharing your response. If no one else has anything to share, I guess we can move on to the next slide. So we have what can cultural events do for the community? And so I feel like in order for, so I know personally, in order for me to ask what can cultural events do for my community, I have to ask why is cultural events important? Like what's so important about cultural events, you know? And so I kind of like came up with like cultural events are essential to community and passing traditions and cultural norms to one generation to the next. It allows space to be held where elderly to young can celebrate common beliefs and values. Cultural events are important because it preserves histories and legacies in a way that pulls community together. So that's kind of like my but I feel like cultural events are important, and some of the things I feel like that can happen from holding a cultural event is that it can one pull communities together. It can strengthen bonds amongst generations. We talk about a lot of the thing about generational gaps. So if there's a cultural event, it can strengthen the bonds within the generations. It also lays down the perfect foundation of passing the torch. So we talk about this idea of like preserving our history, preserving the knowledge. So passing the torch to these cultural events, upholding
Right now.
those traditions, so we can pass that knowledge on.
In
And so I would want to just kind of pose the question to y'all, like, what do you feel like cultural events can do for your community, and why do you feel like cultural events are important?
This is Ellen again. I guess I think about, particularly since we work in an intergenerational model, how I think that cultural events really set a norm and it speaks to passing from one generation to the next, particularly when it's around spiritual rituals. I can remember whenever we go to Roots and Remedies, there's always an opening ceremony. The indigenous people bring the spirits, the ancestors into that space, and I think that's real important because we get away from those kinds of rituals, and I just think that they are important to bring into the space when we're doing this kind of work because there's a spiritual connectedness, I think, to the ancestors that we can't forget or shouldn't forget.
What's up, y'all? This is Jalea. I also wanted to share that I think cultural events kind of allow a small opportunity um, to address the problem of appropriation of different cultures by making cultures available and people being able to see the different origins of multiple different things, whether it be art of multiple different kinds, education, different languages, or whatever things that have been appropriated in multiple different ways. Um, in pop culture and different kinds of media, things like that. It's a way that in our communities and we can allow our youth and like y'all were saying, multiple generations to be able to see those things in their real form and be able to address appropriation in a small way.
Would there be anyone, thank y'all for sharing with us. Would there be anyone else who want to share? What can culture events do for your community, and how are, my bad, what can culture events do for your community and why are they important?
Hey y'all, it's Angel again. I think that cultural events, what it looks like for me, and like thinking about like unification and like what unity really means, I feel like it brings us all together and gives us time to not only mobilize and get things going, but also giving us time to heal and bringing spirituality into that and seeing like how we can be holistic in everything that we do as a community and move together as a community. Um, so I think it's important that when we have that the reasons for cultural events is so that we can all get on the same accord and that we can share stories, experiences, and different ways just to figure out how to keep making it, how to keep surviving, and not having to deal with burnout in like every realm possible when dealing, with being marginalized folks.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I think everyone who kind of like spoke and gave their voice and kind of let their voice be heard. If we can we move on to the next slide? So I want to kind of like take some time out to talk to highlight like something that's of cultural significance to me and also in New Orleans is second lining, and pretty much like second lining is something that we do where it's just like it's a festival situation where we dance, we sing, and second lining in itself is like a dance in itself that I haven't yet quite perfected it yet, but like I just love kind of like being in second lines and kind of enjoying and being around my people and kind of like looking up that and kind of soaking in that history and like that culture. So I was earlier just kind of writing down some things how I felt about second line and things like that, and so I want to kind of share. So pretty much the term second lining originated amongst African American communities, though the tradition itself can be traced back to tribes in Africa. It was a way for people to express common suffering, pain, and joy, whatever it was to make people, whatever it was to have people on, whatever it was that made people gather. I mean, that would gather people. These events often involve dancing, singing, and leaders of the communities. For me, it shows resilience and pride in my people. In New Orleans, we often second line to mourn and celebrate our deceased, and our loved ones. For some, it's like a ceremonial passing, and for others, they call them jazz funerals. Just like second line, jazz funerals or similarities to jazz funerals can be traced back to our ancestors in Africa, such as the Harmings of Benin and the Yoruba of Nigeria, West Africa. New Orleans has such a strong history of slave involvement, from the slave trade in Congo Square to being able to practice religious freedom in Congo Square. In my personal opinion, second line to me is it means to me how we second line. In my personal opinion, second line to me and how we incorporate it is powerful, and that we incorporate in not only just the passing of our dead, but in multiple cultural events that we have in our city. And so the next slide would be me kind of like talking about those cultural events that I feel like recently that we had that embodied that idea of second lining and second lining itself. So if we can kind of like go to the next slide. Alright, so up here there's this you can go back to the other side with the video. Uh-oh. Oh. So this is a video that I found off YouTube. It's a funeral Nigerian style with the title, and I felt like it kind of like reflects upon like some of the funerals that I have experienced in New Orleans, or kind of like when some of my loved ones passed away, like that dance and that culture in itself, and how dance is really like dancing itself is really powerful, and how we celebrate that. So I was kind of like one kind of tie in the two of like the jazz idea of like the jazz funerals for New Orleans, or um, the ceremony of passing, and how that kind of tied to other cultures that's from like that's pretty much descendants of our descendants, and how we uphold that today. And so that was just one example, but kind of so there's one example, and also kind of like just moving on to the next slide. So when we talk about traditions in action, so recently there was this march. The organization Breakout have organized it pretty much just their Trans March of Resilience, and they had a second line component of it in which we second line from Congo Square all the way up there to City Hall, and I feel like that in itself uplift I feel like that in itself uplift like the traditions and the value of second line itself, because it was second line to kind of like, for me personally being in that space, it was more of like having shared understanding, shared struggles, and common truth as queer and trans people. And so far this year we have like over 20 something queer trans women of color who have been murdered. And so for this march, it was just saying like we are going to be resilient, we are beautiful people, and we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to do this, and we're going to continue to celebrate our lives, because each and every day is a beautiful day for us, you know. And that's why I kind of like draw from that march itself, and how I feel like that uplift the whole idea of the whole cultural significance of second lining, like us like being in the same space together, share struggles, common truth, and marching and dancing in order to like kind of like release that. And it's more of like a healing process too. So so for me it's more of second line, it's more of like a healing process. So anytime I get in the middle of the street and like that second line happy and I'm dancing, I'm not dancing just to be dancing. I'm healing. I'm dancing because I'm trying to heal. I'm dancing because I'm putting myself out there, and I'm like have some like some cultural things that it was just more of just like healing from that itself. Um, kind of like moving to the next slide. And actually, no, before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to ask for some of the members who was actually there for the march, if they couldn't necessarily talk about the march itself and what the march meant to them, if that's okay and cool.
Yeah, definitely I say that everything you said about second lining and why we decided to incorporate second lining this year into the march, definitely because we wanted to add to the tradition of T-Door, our Trans Day of Remembrance, and adding that resilience to it, and more of a component of celebrating those that we have lost, but also celebrating the lives that we're still living, and the resilience that we have to have just to be queer and trans youth of color on a daily basis. So definitely just I say to all of that.
Conferencecall.com. There is one other participant in the conference.
Hey, my apologies. My laptop is actually about to die. So, yes, thank you. Beautiful. So there are also Katrina 10 events. So when I say Katrina 10, I'm pretty much emphasize on the anniversary of Katrina. Not just highlighting this event, which was the 10th anniversary of Katrina, but highlighting the efforts of the locals and also the people who were affected by Hurricane Katrina and moving forward. So each year since then, there have been an effort in order to to celebrate the lives that were missing, celebrate the lives that was taken during Hurricane Katrina, and also to kind of that resilience, to show that resilience of the city. And so I feel so another thing that they do in that is they second line for that too. And so I feel like the second line in itself is one of those scenarios that it uphold that culture of second line itself, because we are second line to show homage, we're second line to show our respect to the ones who have those died in Hurricane Katrina, our loved ones that are no longer here. And so I kind of wrote something about what I feel we're second line for we're second line for Katrina anniversary events. So I say celebrating the struggles of those who were affected by Katrina. These events are healing and processing for the people because they are working together to remember their resilience. These events are organized by people that were affected by Katrina, so we won't forget the wrong that was done to us by our government. Every day we are reminded of the struggles and of the struggle and our passion to survive. The strength we obtain from communities in order to keep us moving. So for me, that's how I look at Katrina anniversary event. Not necessarily saying yeah, Katrina happened, but saying we survived from that and we're going to move forward from that. And due to circumstances government wasn't there for us, but at the end of the day, we're going to continue to move forward. And when I join on second line, it's me saying yes, I'm second line for my people. I'm second line for the ones who was before me, the ones who laid down the foundation, the ones who were kind of if it was not for them, I would not be in the position that I am now. So that's why I enjoy the Katrina 10 events. And so so we got to, I was talking about the whole idea of second line being a tradition in New Orleans and how we uphold that tradition through certain cultural events such as jazz funerals, Timor, or anniversaries of Katrina such as Katrina 10. But there's also the idea of appropriation. So I haven't really gave many examples of when cultural events and traditions become appropriated. And so if we can move on to the next slide. So I have when traditions become appropriated. So basically I have this outlay of these Paris, this background of bourbon, and this whole carnival of Mardi Gras scene thing happening right about now. And so for me it's I want to make it clear that Mardi Gras and carnival in itself is something that's culturally significant for the city of New Orleans, and also of course it's significant for other countries and other cultures too. What I want to hint at is the idea of second lining. So for me, when we have tourists come in who are just morning just drunk and just kind of just want to just be there because it's like, okay, it's once a year thing, it's a trend, like we want to have fun, it's cool to be down there and do it and things like that. But I understand that when you engage in these second linings, when you engage in these events, you are appropriating our culture. You come down here for 1 or 2 days, and basically what you're just doing is saying, forget us, it's a spit in the face. And so when I think about second line and migrant, I think about like that appropriating component towards that, like the idea of like tourists coming to the city and not knowing what they're doing, just kind of engaging in the festival activities. It's one thing to appreciate something, but it's another thing to take away from it and engage in something in which you don't necessarily know why people do it or how they do it. So that's when I think about traditions that become appropriated in terms of just like that, this mainstream idea of Minecraft, this mainstream idea of the Big Easy, the French Quarter situation. So that's what I think about appropriation within a context of second lining and how they can affect other events. So if we can move on to the next screen. So I want to pose a question. So my question is, what are things that can happen as a result of when culture becomes appropriate? So you have either like you can either dial in the number 712-770-40110 and give us your response, or I mean the access code is 958241. Give us your response, or you can send us your response on hashtag Teamwork Skillshare or hashtag South. And I also want to like open up as I want to open up as a way for people to kind of call in or whatnot, for some of my cohort members to kind of like talk about what are things that can happen as a result of when culture becomes appropriate. So how do y'all want to answer that?
Hey, what's up? It's Angel again. I think things that happen when cultures are become appropriated is that the folks whose culture it originally is, they start to get silenced, they get erased, and then the biggest thing is that they get dehumanized. So it's like everything about them and like all of the attributions that they bring are great, but just not on them, right? So I feel like it strips people from who they are. It doesn't bring a sense of unity to having like a shared culture with someone and what that can look like and like how magical that is to have that special bond with people. And so for that to be taken, like it kind of leaves you with a sense of like nothingness, like nothing I will ever do will be mine. Like every breath, every movement that I take will never be mine, right? Because of risk of like what I am doing will eventually be of someone else. And like I would never be appreciated and valued and lifted up in power for what I brought into the table. So I feel like that's some results that could happen when cultures become appropriated.
Hi, this is Jovan, and I just wanted to add something from the call-in line. So a person shared that from listening to the talk, they see how appropriation can lead to like bigger and deeper, leads into different social structures. So how appropriation leads to gentrification and how it leads and ripples into displacement. And so really seeing how it's really a critical thing for us to consider. As we also battle against things like, physical displacement of bodies and gentrification in our communities.
Thank you. Anyone else kind of like want to share what they want to have related to the question?
This is Ellen again. I think about how, particularly for people of color, as an enslaved people, I think we appropriated the way we are with our children in terms of hitting and beating and being really negative toward our children. So I think that appropriations can be, we take it on from the dominant culture. And it's used against us. Our fight in Mississippi around eliminating corporal punishment. When we speak to white legislators, of course, they say it is a part of our culture. When we speak to black legislators about getting rid of it, they then use it to say, it worked for me and look how great I am. So I think that we can take on from the dominant culture, and it really does hurt us in the long run. So that's, as I was thinking about your conversation and hearing it, that's what I was thinking about. We can take it on, and then it's used against us.
So one more thing from those who are listening and participating online and through the webs. Nat to Kat shared that erasure happens when culture is appropriated on Twitter. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add on something to the cultural appropriation piece. So the hip hop culture is something that is extremely appropriated and used against us. So it started off as a way for people to express themselves, not just about the hardships in the community, but it started off as more of a positive thing, and then it's been appropriated. People have bought the rights to records. People are signing artists to these record companies, and they're signing them into slave contracts almost to kind of almost turn them against their communities. So yeah, hip hop cultural appropriation is something that is running rampant in the media right now, and it's also very much so being used against people of color. And another example is the style of clothing that comes along with the quote-unquote hip-hop culture. So, for instance, the do-rag situation, or the baggy pants situation. So, I don't know if people noticed, but Chanel, the clothing company, they are now selling do-rags for like $75 as couture fashion. But if like somebody who's brown skin or brown body goes into a store at Saks Fifth Avenue that sells those do-rags with the do-rag on, they would be looked at crazy. So yeah, that's one thing I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what I'm saying. Like, even everything about Black folks seems to be trendy, seems to be edgy. Just even thinking about skin color and like how white folks are really interested in always being darker, right? And having dark attributes, having voluptuous bodies and things like that. So it's like everything about Black folks is continuously appropriated, and it's just so profound. It's like the statement that it's like everybody wants to be Black, but nobody really want to be Black, right? So it's like you want everything about us but our struggles. You know what I'm saying? And like what we deal with on the day-to-day basis is being Black folks in the world, and what that looks like.
Thank you. I say thank everyone for sharing. Like, that was beautiful. Thank you, Javon, for holding down the line for us. Allowing other folks who are not with us to have their voice be heard too. So once I really appreciate that. And thanks. Some of the things that I wrote down was like that what can happen as a result of like culture becoming appropriate. It's like I feel like it kind of normalized violence and historical oppression. Like if you're constantly like appropriating my culture, you're constantly like, so like in itself, you appropriating my culture in itself is act of violence towards me. Like I take offense to that. And it like goes on with like this oppressive historical oppression. Like it shows that you are not valuing me, you're not valuing my life, you're not valuing my people. I say like so like one of the things that I feel often that it does that it allows for folks to like say, oh, I can like get down with that. I love what you do, but I don't love who do it. So I feel like it can allow this space for people to be like, oh, I'm going to appreciate or I'm going to incorporate this because I think it's a cool trend for now, but I'm going to like still be courteous and criminalize individuals who this culture belongs to or who this specific trend belongs to. So I feel like that for cultural appropriation kind of come to this idea of like really being harmful for communities, in which it's like you are taking my culture, but at the same time you're criminalizing me for it too, and you're making profit off me. Um, and kind of goes into like it spread lies, like someone said something about like you lose that narrative, like it spreads lies, like things become diluted, and you kind of like you lose that narrative, like it won't be the same anymore if you're constantly appropriating culture because everyone thinks that they can add their 2 cents to something that was not meant for them in the first place. And I'm a firm believer that there are certain spaces that are meant for certain people. Like if I have a space that's meant for just like this specific group of people, then that space is there as a healing space. It's there for a reason. You know, we need our spaces to ourselves. You know, and so it's like when we have a cultural thing, it's more eliminated this outer space. We need that, and that's our healing process. And when that becomes appropriated, it becomes more harmful for us, you know, and ultimately we get marginalized even further. We get pushed out of those spaces that was once ours. So if we could move on to the next slide. So this is just kind of just going along with some of like what can happen, just kind of highlighting some things of what can happen when you appropriate culture. Like you lose trust in the community. Like the community is not gonna really want to like mess with you or really like organize with you. They feel like you as a person, as a white person, kind of coming to their spaces, just kind of like pretty much like you're studying them for the most part, so you can run back and like steal their stuff. Narrative shifts and change. The portrayal of another story that further marginalize people. So it's like if you're constantly appropriating culture, appropriating stories, then after a while it's like the Stonewall situation. Like you made a whole movie that did not reflect upon the people who was actually there, who was actually experiencing that that struggle, and so that in itself marginalized and pushed that history out, and history got lost. And you had to like make a whole campaign or whole rally behind like trying to preserve that history, which kind of like goes to the next thing, like you create anger and confusion, you know, which can lead to segregation and loss of parent solidarity, which is a loss of parent solidarity. And so that was just some bit of points that I was just kind of thinking about of what could happen when you appropriate culture. If we can move on to the next slide, if possible. So this one is what are other examples of appropriation and the harm it can cause? Like I said, you can either give your response on hashtag Team or Skillshare, or show your response on hashtag Career South, or call in the number, which is at the bottom of the string, 712-770-4010, access code 958241. Without further ado, I want to like offer some time for my cohort members to kind of talk about what are examples of appropriation and the harm it can cause. Does anyone have anything they want to share? Like thumbs up, thumbs down. All right, so we.
So I did want to just I don't know, I guess reiterate kind of. So I remember last time we were talking about this, Angel brought up when we were at a conference, and you know sometimes folks are very aware that they may be appropriating, and I think it's important that even when someone might be aware, that folks step up and challenge them and really, you know, force folks to think about how even like the hair or how they're wearing their hair is appropriating, particularly when they're in spaces that should be free of that type of violence.
Another thing that I noticed when I go out is like how intense it is for like non-POC folks and non-Black folks will be, and observing like how we move in our dance movements, and then we'll like lurk and be like right up on us if we're trying to dance, and then the next thing you know they're trying to like copy the dances that we do. And I just find it really funny. Like I have those experiences often, like whenever I go to the club or something. The like white people will just be like staring real hard and be like, ooh, let me get all up in this circle.
Thank you. Anyone else kind of like want to share their response? If not, we can move on to the next slide. So this is another question that I want to ask. How can we hold each other accountable when appreciating culture? So I just want to reiterate the fact that we do have a hashtag Skillshare, hashtag PeerSouth, and the dial-in numbers so people can call and kind of like share their response or whatnot. And also, my friend Harlem, who works with the Two Spirit community, gave me the permission to just speak on some things for them. And so when we pose this question of like how we can hold each other accountable when appreciating culture, Harlem gave us the honor of like understand like their culture as Native individuals and what they kind of go through in terms of like inviting people to their space. So I'm just going to be kind of like reading off of some of the notes that they shared with me. So it's like protocol to ensure accountability at Two-Spirit gatherings. One, anyone who identifies as Native or Two-Spirit are welcome and has full access to all spaces at the gathering, including ceremonies. Two, partners and or spouses of anyone above also are welcome and has full access to all spaces at the gathering, including ceremonies. Three, guests are not natives. Guests who are not natives or is a partner with a person with a native person must be sponsored by an attendee who is native. The sponsored individual does not have access to any ceremonial held at the gathering. All the actions of the individual who is being sponsored becomes the action of the responsibility of the sponsor. So if the sponsored guests act inappropriately, the leadership of the gathering goes to the sponsor and asks why they act that way. And so that was just kind of like what their protocol in terms of like how they hold people accountable within their space, but how they hold each other accountable. So when you come into their spaces outside, how someone who's like that space belongs to hold you accountable, how that space will hold that person accountable too. So I know we were talking about ways that that we can like call people out on ways that they appropriate people. I mean, with how they appropriate culture. So how can we hold each other accountable in terms of how we appreciate culture? And so that would be the question that I would want to pose to my cohort, and also the question that I want to pose to the people at home too. So like I said, the dial-in numbers right there, access code, hashtag Teamwork Skillshare, hashtag PeerSouth. And I would like to leave it to some of my cohort to answer this question.
I think communication is really key. kind of similar to what I said before, that like if we're not communicating with each other and holding each other accountable in very personal ways, so like whoever you know, whoever you're close to, whoever you're sharing space with, making sure that you hold them accountable and as Harlan mentioned, hold whoever they're bringing into space accountable too, like through the people who are bringing them in.
Thank you. Anyone else kind of has something that they want to add on to how we can hold each other accountable when appreciating culture? Alrighty, so we can move on to the next slide. Thank you for speaking. So I have a list of questions. So this is what the deep conversation part is gonna happen. I've been speaking for like the past like 30 minutes or whatnot. So I want to kind of hold open in conversation. Still remembering that you can also still use the dial-in number for this part, and also the hashtag Team or Skillshare with the hashtag Career South, and kind of like answer these questions or what do you think about these questions. So I want to kind of like open up the floor for my cohort members to kind of like have a dialogue about these questions right about now. So the first question is like questions to ask when participate in the culture event as outside slash and or ally. So the first question is, do you understand what is happening? And so what I mean by this question is like, do you understand why I am here? Do you understand what is happening within this space? And so just kind of like want to pass the question to some of my cohort members, like what do you kind of ask yourself when you enter a space that's not normally like your space, and how do you kind of like hone on to that? So this is like the workshop part of the Skillshare. So normally what it was just like you have like your worksheet and you do your thing on the side. But this is more of like instead of like that, I want us to have a conversation, or like a free flowing conversation. So this would be like normal part where like you do your workshop part, but this is just us holding a conversation and open up to the folks at home too. So feel free to kind of like jump in for the questions, or you can just stand here in silence and look pretty.
I think these are really, really great questions. I wonder if there's like one more that's about like getting specific permission from either whoever's organizing it, whoever's holding the space to be in the space, yeah. I think that like as an ally or outsider, it's really critical to make sure that you actually have been invited into the space rather than just showing up and assuming that you can ask these questions without that first level of permission to be there.
Thank you. Yes. So yeah, I think that is like yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. Actually, to add on to these questions before we go on to understand why we're here, we must ask for that permission. So, so how would like this in general? How would like give me a scenario in which you would probably ask for permission to go into a space?
I guess so. One specific place that's happened for me is when I've been in Haiti, and like visiting churches in particular, and other sort of cultural ceremonies and voodoo ceremonies and whatnot, and particularly because I don't practice, to really be clear when I'm stepping into that sort of space to ask and be sure that it's okay for me to be there. That for me has been like my specific example of making sure that I need to ask for permission before kind of just stepping into that really spiritual space.
Thank you. Anyone else have any examples or any experiences that they want to share with us?
Hey, this is Anna. A few months ago, I went with a group of folks to help support a powwow that was happening in South Louisiana. And so, as a white person, in particular, in spaces that are usually HUPOC spaces, but in particular, this space was for First Nation Indigenous folks. Just being really aware. A lot of these questions I ask myself when I go into these spaces, in particular, like how is my presence affecting the space? If it is appropriate, we were invited in, so that was definitely like the first initial step. But just figuring out how to navigate that space and not interfere with like the purposes of that space, which have nothing to do with me really.
Thank you. I appreciate HR responses. So the next question, so this is just me kind of just like reading off the list of questions. So if you're like feel more like inclined to answer the last question than compared to the second question, then like please do so. Just state the question that you're answering, and then kind of just go ahead and answer that question. So like I said, I'm just going down the list. If you want to jump the list or whatnot, then you can do so. So the second question is my present appropriate? I.e., am I being respectful to the culture with what I'm wearing and how I show up in this space? So I feel like that kind of goes on with what Harlan was saying in terms of accountability. Like, what am I wearing? What am I showing up into this space? Like, how am I presenting myself? It's like, I'm like going into the space as a white person with beads in my hair or locks in my hair, which may be considered to be appropriating or just be putting out offensive, or am I coming to the space as my full self, And so like that's something that we should ask ourselves, like whether no matter what, like we come into this space as our full selves or not.
Can I speak to that? This is Ellen again. I'm interviewing elders who are farmers or landowners. And I can remember going to Low Country. And I always ask permission to speak because in some cultures, you ask the elder before you begin to speak. And so I'm always conscious of what I'm wearing, particularly when I'm interviewing elders. I am 60, and when I speak of elders, I'm talking about 75 and 80-year-olds who are accustomed to wanting people to respond, yes ma'am or no ma'am. But also in just simply asking, can I speak? Can I have a seat? Explaining what I am doing, what I will do with an image, particularly for an image, because in Low Country people are uncomfortable with taking pictures, and so I'm always very conscious of my presence and getting permission to do things before I do them. So I really thought about that as I think about my work and moving through different spaces, whether I am in a queer community or in an elderhood or with ancestors. I'm always conscious of who I am and what is expected of me. I try to be conscious.
Right. Thank you. Did anyone else kind of like want to like answer a question up here before I kind of like wrap it up? Or does anyone else that's like out of like through the call in or with the hashtag or the with the hashtag who want to share a question? Kind of conclude what the Skillshare today. I would like to thank everyone who participated in the Skillshare. I would like to give a thanks to my cohort who showed up and within support me in solidarity. I like to give the thanks to people at home who participated within the conversation, hashtag Team of Skillshare, hashtag Chris South, and folks who are called into the line. And just want to let you know, like, have a great. Oh, we have one more share. Yay.
Okay, so we had one more share from the call line. Nat from Mississippi spoke about making or asking organizers for permission about how you can help. And if the organizers say that you can't help or there's no space from you, taking that and understanding it and moving along without kind of trying to battle for space. So really, you know, asking for space, asking if there's a way to assist, and if there isn't, making sure that you step back respectfully.
Thank you. And I find that's the perfect note in terms of summarizing everything. Like, if you are a person who is a participating in a cultural event, understand that, like, if it's not your culture, understand that there are some steps out of first, like, ask for permission to be in that space. Second, once you get the permission, check yourself first. Check your presence. Understand why I'm here. Am I here to learn or am I here to appropriate? Check your physical space, like check if you're wearing something that might be appropriating to that culture or offensive, and ultimately how can we uplift cultural differences. And NAP Mississippi, I want to thank you for throwing in the extra layer of conversation of like how can we help, how can people who are not necessarily a part of that culture come into a cultural event or come to an encounter with people who are reflecting that culture in a way that they can help in terms of uplifting that culture, not appropriating that culture. So, like I said, I want to thank everyone who participated, everyone who kind of like joined the line. Thank everyone who kind of like helped maintain this and help it to run as smoothly as it could. So, yeah, I want to say thank y'all. And I really appreciate everyone who was involved in this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.